Hello, this is Dave Hurwitz, Executive Editor at ClassicsToday.com, here to talk about the best recordings of Saint-Saëns Organ Symphony. Don't you just love this piece? I mean, you fall in love with it the first time you hear it, and then you start listening to it more frequently and you realize, my oh my, there have been so many bad recordings of it. I think probably the worst was Herbert von Karajan's. Remember that? Really early, glary, awful sounding digital recording with the organ from the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris, which was dubbed in subsequently, and it just sounded like a white noise generator. I mean, the whole thing was just sluggish in tempo and in sonority, especially in the finale. It was just anti-musical. I mean, it was horrible. The Karajan Gold Edition tried to fix it somewhat by making the organ sound less like a blast of static, like radio static. It just went like that, but it didn't really help very much. That may be the worst version, but there are really a lot of very mediocre, I wouldn't say bad, but mediocre versions, because the piece is such a bear to record. You really need to have a recording that's made with an organ in the room, and it has to be a concert organ. You can't do it in a church. The music absolutely dies in a church acoustic, because think of the way Saint-Saëns wrote. Think of the first subject. I mean, forget it. Too much reverberation. That is never going to come through. And the same thing with the scherzo, which is actually the same tune. It's it's a bear. It's so difficult to get right, and a reverberant acoustic will destroy it. But on the other hand, you want to have amplitude, the sound of the organ. So you have to have an orchestra in a room with a real organ. I mean, the first time I ever heard it was with the Yale Symphony Orchestra when I was a kid at Woolsey Hall at Yale. And, they have one of the most magnificent American organs, an Aeolian Skinner. It's I believe the Newbury organ is the name of it, but it's an Aeolian Skinner organ. And it is one of the great examples of orchestral organ building in the United States. And they played that thing, and my God, it was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. And there's nothing like the sound of the orchestra and the organ at full tilt together. And the balances have to be achieved by the conductor. You can't engineer it very easily. And there have been very, very, very few successful versions as a result. There have been some very good performances that sound very bad. There have been some very good sounding ones that are not such good performances. It's a very, very difficult piece to do well. And so I'm going to talk to you now about what I think are the best versions, some of them classics, some of them sleepers that you may not have thought about, but these are all really worthy efforts. And the first is one that was sort of a reference version for a while, in the 80s possibly. This is Daniel Barenboim with the Chicago Symphony. I mean, the Chicago Symphony plays fabulously. The organ was tracked in subsequently, but it was pretty well done. The actual sound is a little on the dry side. It's a little bit dry, but that's better that than too reverberant. But it's a smoker of a performance, exciting and beautifully played. And it's going to live or die on how well you like the engineering. I have found over time that I prefer other versions that to me have a more natural sound, but I can't question the quality of the performance or the interpretation. Next, Jean Martinon. This is available on Brilliant Classics too. It's been available a bunch of different ways. Part of the complete Saint-Saëns symphonies, of which there are very few cycles. There was one on Vox, I think with Louis de Froment, and there's one happening now with the Utah Symphony on Hyperion. Nobody cares about the other Saint-Saëns symphonies. And it's really a pity because a couple of them are really beautiful. But Martinon, as always, was a great, great French orchestra conductor. He just did all the French orchestral repertoire. He did so well, and he made two recordings of this. Actually, there was one with Marie-Claire Alain, I believe, on Erato, and he was a magician in this repertoire, and his performance is as beautiful and as well shaped as any. Again, the sonics not fabulous, but respectable, and they don't conceal the excellence of the performance. Next, one of the really older one, Paul Perez with Mercury Living Presence. Remember this thing? This is a great recording, and it was very well recorded because Wilma Cozart-Fine, who did these recordings, was going to make damn sure that it was very well recorded in a room with an organ with only their usual 3 microphones. And the coupling is quite wonderful. Paul Perez's Joan of Arc Mass, which has a last movement, Agnus Dei, that is so beautiful. Holy cow, it's gorgeous. So this is a recording that's definitely worth considering, and you will be surprised at just how good it sounds. I mean, the balances are all natural, and the performance comes off extremely well, especially given its age. I mean, what's the date of this thing? It was recorded in 1957, and it's splendid. Next, this is one that I have sort of a personal affection for, so you may want to take that into account in considering my recommendation. This is Edo de Ward and the San Francisco Symphony. It's also available on Eloquence coupled with Heiting's excellent Bizet Symphony in C. You can get it either way, but this was the original release. I was in San Francisco when this was done. I was there when they dedicated the organ. I knew the engineer who made the recording. You know, de Ward did an earlier version of the symphony in Rotterdam for Philips, but this was head and shoulders above, not just sonically, because they're using the new organ in Davies Hall, but it was just a much more propulsive and exciting and performance that was recorded with greater clarity. And I think, for my money, this is one of the great recordings of the work. And it got almost no attention when it came out. Nobody talks about it now, and I can't understand why, because you won't hear better. You really won't. It's just a perfectly proportioned, magnificently played, extremely well recorded performance. This was an early digital. It was 1984. You couldn't be sure in those days that a Philips digital was going to sound any good. I mean, some of them, remember, like the Colin Davis 1812 Overture and Romeo and Juliet, whatever it was. I mean, it was just, oh my God, it was horrible. I mean, there were some Philips recordings that were as dry as dust. They were terrible. There was a Heiting Beethoven Ninth, it was live from the Concertgebouw. They were just unlistenable. They were so bad. But this one, they got it right. And it still sounds wonderful. That's Edo de Ward and the San Francisco Symphony. Next, another recording you might not be thinking about all that much. Eduardo Mata and the Dallas Symphony with Jean Gaillou, coupled with the best ever recording of the Jongen Sinfonia Concertante, which was also recorded in San Francisco to dedicate the new organ there. Now, this is a Dorian recording, and again, the sonics are, just perfect. And you know what's funny about this is that Mata got very, very little attention for his expertise with French music. He did a first-rate Ravel cycle for RCA that was only marred by a badly misengineered early digital Daphnis and Chloe that sounded like a castanet concerto. It was really a shame. But he was really terrific in French music generally. And his death, he died in a plane accident with his girlfriend, was horribly tragic. I had been with him a few months previously in Venezuela, where he was recording with the Orchestra Sinfónica Simón Bolívar there. And his death came as a terrible, terrible shock. He was a terrific interpreter of Mediterranean music. And he knew what he was good at, and he basically did what he was good at. And he made a fantastic series of recordings for Dorian of that repertoire, particularly. Not everything was equally great. The Shostakovich-Leningrad Symphony was a little bit, on the Leningrad-y side. It was a little long in the tooth. But the French music, first class. And this is a first-class performance of the symphony, and perhaps sonically the best of them all. It has absolutely ideal balances, perfect in all respects, and the orchestra sounds wonderful at tempos that make perfect sense, that are just right for the amount of reverberation you've got in the recording. It was all beautifully planned and executed. And if you could find this one still, you really owe it to yourself to hear it. And the Jongen, too, is a knockout. I mean, it's a great piece. It's lots of fun to listen to. And this performance is wonderful. But we all have to make a final choice. and you know what the final choice is going to be. But before I make the final choice, I'm going to keep you in suspense. I'm going to mention another one that you probably wouldn't think about, but you should. It's here on my iPhone. This is it. Eugene Ormandy, the Philadelphia Orchestra, the Sony recording. This was, Ormandy did it at least 3 times. There was an RCA one, and then there was one for Telarc toward the end of his career. But the best one was this one with E-Power Biggs and the Philadelphia Orchestra on Sony. It is the best engineered. It happens to be a very successful piece of engineering, all things considered. And it's coupled with the greatest Danse Macabre ever, and a lot of other, Saint-Saëns short works and things like that. It's a wonderful, warm, gorgeous performance. It's Ormandy doing what Ormandy did best. You won't hear a more luscious account of the slow movement of the Adagio. It's to die for. But the playing is crisp and sharp, and again, well balanced all the way through. And the organ, which is an electronic one, I think it's if I recall correctly, it wasn't even a pipe organ, but it's a good sounding instrument, and it's very, very well balanced. I mean, the engineers got it right, and they let Ormandy and Philadelphia strut their stuff. It's remarkable how good it is. It really is. I listen to it all the time, and I get a tremendous amount of pleasure out of it still. But now, after that little interlude, just to keep you in suspense, you knew it was coming. Charles Munch and the Boston Symphony on living stereo. This defines the word classic. I mean, the Symphony Hall in Boston is one of the great halls in the world acoustically. And it has an absolutely splendid organ. And, this is what the work sounds like when you have an orchestra in a good hall with a good organ and a great conductor. And interestingly, Munch had this reputation for being, a wild man. But in the studio, he could actually be a lot more restrained. And you know how at the end of the finale, usually there's like a big accelerando when it's going da 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 da. You know what I mean, right? You all know that part. Going into the coda. And Munch doesn't speed up at all. It's kind of amazing. It's very steady. He does something very similar, actually, in his Daphnis and Chloe too. He keeps the tempo steady, and the result is remarkable. I mean, it has a grandeur without pomposity, but just a majesty that's unequaled by any other performance. And getting to that point is a joy from first note to last. And the recording still sounds like it was made yesterday, because good balances, sensible microphone placement, it works so much better than all of those tricks and bells and whistles and things that people try to pull with multi-microphones and dubbing and recording the orchestra in Santiago and the organ in the Philippines. It's just nuts to do it that way. Either you have the forces and you have the venue, or you don't. And if you don't make the record. But when you do, magic happens. And here it is, the Saint-Saëns Organ Symphony to die for. Charles Munch and the Boston Symphony. Thank you all, and keep on listening.